Hey everybody, we have an awesome interview for you today. Matt sits down with songwriter and worship leader Jon Egan, and they talk about how to avoid comparison as a worship leader. They get into a ton of stuff today that I found really encouraging, and we hope you do too. Enjoy.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Loop Live. My name's Matt McCoy. I'm the founder of loopcommunity.com, coming to you from a basement in Chicago. And today I've got a really, really special guest. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Jon Egan from New Life Worship, New Life Church in Colorado Springs. He's going to be joining us. He's going to be talking to us about a topic that I actually heard at a worship conference a couple years ago when he was speaking, and it really impacted me. And I'm like, we've got to get him on the Loop Live show. So I'm really excited to have Jon here with us. Wherever you're watching from, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, write down in the comments if you've got any questions for Jon or anything that we're talking about. Write down in the comments questions, and we might take some live questions if we've got some good ones. So go ahead and start working on some good questions, and we'll take those live. But without further ado, here is Jon Egan. Jon, what's up, man?
How are you, Matt? It's good to see you, man.
So good to see you. It's been a while, and your hair has gotten a lot longer since I last saw you.
Yes. Well, COVID began that situation, and then I decided just to keep it going. You have to kind of get through the awkward stage.
Yeah, there is the awkward stage for sure.
Some would argue, and my wife would probably argue that I'm still in the awkward stage.
No, but I think you're past that.
Yeah?
It's when you've got this little like mullet thing going on here. Like I'm kind of entering the awkward stage here pretty soon. But I do get you though, in that once you start growing it out, you got to just like keep going. You can't stop.
And here's kind of the backstory. We were in the pandemic hit, we were all shut down, churches were shut down. And then it was, not to go too serious too quick, but it's like the streets were filled with like protests that were going on. There was all kinds of racial complications that were happening or still happening. And someone said it was my dad. My dad said, he was encouraging me. He's like, Jon, keep singing songs to Jesus. Now it's the 60s all over again. It's happening. And he said,
yeah,
the streets are full of violence, vitriol. The political scene is chaotic. And then there's a bunch of long-haired hippies inside the church singing songs to Jesus. And it just inspired me. And yeah. I'm just going to keep growing out my hair just to kind of honor something my dad said, like almost in passing. But it's just kind of my nod at, all right, the Jesus movement, the people that were within the church kind of just singing love songs to God while there was so much, the opposite of love was happening so much outside. So this is kind of, this is my 70s, my 60s.
Man, I love that because my parents both grew up, well, they were in San Diego in like the 60s, 70s during the Jesus movement, like in Southern California.
Yeah.
And I just hear stories from them all the time of like their, worship circles that they would do on the beach. Hundreds of people would just gather around like a bonfire on the beach, and they'd be doing baptisms in the ocean. Or just, even if you go back and listen to some of those old worship recordings from like Maranatha and like Calvary Chapel, Southern California, man, there's just such a tenderness and sweetness to those songs and that worship. I still listen to it constantly. I actually have a playlist on my Apple Music of just the really old school stuff, because there's nothing like it, honestly. There's nothing like it today. That it was a special time.
Well, yeah. I'm 42 years old. How old are you, Matt?
I'm 37.
Okay, so we have like kind of our generation. Yeah, so Vineyard. You mentioned Maranatha, Vineyard.
I grew up in the Vineyard. My dad was a Vineyard pastor.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Because a lot of like worship before that, like in the 50s, early 60s, was a lot of it was real like a mighty fortress is our God, Victor Jesus, and the Vineyard guys. They weren't saying no to that. They were saying yes. And how about we kind of simplify? Let's play some acoustic guitars, and let's sing to Jesus like we really know him. Let's sing to Jesus like he's near. So that movement really impacted my life as well.
Yeah, the songs were very personal. I still sing a lot of them to my daughter every night when like at nighttime, like Just like
Yeah.
I love you, Lord, or you know,
As
bless
the
the
deer
deer,
panteth forth.
Lord, as a deer. Man,
Yeah.
there's just so many good ones.
Rough.
So, and it's not that there aren't
Yeah.
good songs now, but there was just something special about that time. And so I do think that you're right. It was a time though when there was revival happening. You know, the Jesus
Yeah.
movement was a revival happening. Young people were getting
It wa-
saved radically,
Yeah.
changing their lives.
And you were singing for your life. And I
Yeah.
think that's what shaped my worship so much, is that I'm not singing because I love these songs. When you're singing for your life, when you want an answer, when you want an antidote or something, that kind of goes the opposite way of what you're seeing out in culture or seeing in the world. That's what those guys were tapping into. And I think it's what we're tapping into again as in worship culture. That's really been a blast to see, is that people are singing again for their lives. Like, no, this is real. This is more than an industry. It's more than a genre.
Yeah.
If we don't have this, we die. And I think the pandemic was a huge part of that, because it was the first time in a long time that the world, especially the Western world, especially Americans, I'll pick on just us, like it's the first time in a long time that we realize we're not in control.
Yeah. Right.
So then it begs the question, it's like, well, okay, then who kind of has a say? And that's why a lot of people return back to faith.
Yeah.
That's been cool.
That's so good. So what, taking it just a little lighter just for a second, what's your favorite like old school worship song? I'll start with the one that's like hitting me really right now is Father, we love you, we praise you, we adore you, glorify thy name and all the. That one, I'm like digging that one right now.
That is so good. We'll do like these worship nights here, and I'll do like a little 10-15 minute segment of just old campfire songs that like were altar songs for me when I was young. So to your question, so some of it is like, draw me close to you, never let me go, that you're all I want, that or Refiner's Fire. Refiner's fire, my heart's one desire is to be holy. And then like not as thrown back, but kind of in that world is Breathe. This is the air I breathe. Oh man.
Those are all the good, like early 90s. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Man. Well, so John, we've met in person maybe twice, but I heard you speak at a conference called Refuel in Northern Indiana. I think it was in like 2019. It was definitely before the pandemic.
Yeah, it was.
And you gave a talk to a room full of like 1,000 worship leaders. And you gave this talk about, well, it was about a lot of different things, but it was mainly about like the idolization of worship, the struggle of comparison that worship leaders can feel. You talked a little bit about the fatherhood of, or like we need worship fathers to be coaching younger worship leaders who are coming in. Because there's a lot of young new worship leaders that maybe are trying to look the part, play the role. You know, they can sing great, they can play a set list like no one. But maybe they don't understand actually like the theology or like the why we are leading worship and the pastoral side of it. And so we need worship fathers. You kind of talked about a lot of that, and it really impacted me. And I thought, we've got to get you on to talk a little bit about that, because you've got something in there that's very special that needs to be heard. So I'm wondering, could you spend maybe the next like 5 to 10 minutes, however long you want to go, honestly, and just give us a little bit, like give a little mini talk about that, rehash some of that stuff.
Kind of sum it up. Yeah. Well, thanks, man. I do remember that event. And when they asked me to speak at that, they were saying, we're looking at like 1,000 worship leaders and worship pastors and volunteers, and it's just right up my alley. I want to get in front of as many worship leaders as I can so we could do this thing together and warn each other of the pitfalls and the whole thing about idols, like you mentioned idols. So in the book of Acts 17, Paul, who's kind of like this spiritual dad, he's a spiritual father, which I think is a big antidote to the stuff that we see a lot in worship culture, is that we need to step into fatherhood and motherhood, because it's what God is doing from Genesis to Revelation. He's not building leaders. God's not building performers. He's not building rock stars. He's not even building gifts, though there are gifts. He's building a family. And the scriptures talk about that a lot, but it's something that we don't tap into as much because it's not as glamorous. But one of the things that happens is Paul's kind of this spiritual dad character that we should try to imitate. He's in Athens waiting. He's actually waiting on some of his younger. So say Paul is a worship leader, he's waiting on some of his team, and Timothy and Silas. And he's in Athens, and while he's there waiting, he wasn't even there really to do ministries. They're waiting, and he just is what they say. The scriptures say that his heart was really troubled by all the idols in town, basically. And so for me, like, I think something about I'm 42 now. When I turned 40, I don't know, maybe there was like a time of permission giving from God to kind of have eyes a bit more open and to speak a bit more boldly to the idols, to the unique idols. And so I think at that conference, what I was saying, it's like, we are in this culture, whether we want to be or not. This is our time. We are the people on the earth right now. And so to impact culture, we have to be aware of its unique idols. And so, it's refreshing to just name. I heard a therapist once say that it's impossible to heal from anything that you refuse to name. So when I want to name idols, I hope I don't ever want to come across with a critical spirit. It's a spirit. It's a love that I feel for what Jesus is doing on the earth, especially with worship. It's a passion to see us worship in the way that the scriptures talk about us worshiping, to see the spirit of truth, a spirit and truth, and to see acceptable worship, like the scriptures talk about in the book of Hebrews. When the scriptures talk about acceptable worship, that means there's kind of an unacceptable. So I think it's important for us to see the unique idols that we're surrounded by. So that's what I was talking about at that conference, and we touched on stuff that we all see and we're all trying to name, but we're also trying to figure out how to solve or try to work with. And it's a journey. We're all pilgrims. And the book of Psalms has this great 15 Psalm stretch that we're all pilgrims, like ascending into basically into the city of God. And it takes time. And it's not like, hey, I've come here with 5 things to fix celebrity culture. It's not that is not even, I don't even think the Jesus way. I think Jesus is like kind of a slow burn. The life of God is a journey on the long road of obedience. And but I think here we are with an opportunity to name these things. So yeah, you can name celebrity culture. You can name personality driven leaders who are filling stadiums with, because of who they are. And you just see in worship industry, and you see, and I've been writing songs and releasing songs for almost 20 years, and I've seen the pressure in my own life to do photo shoots a certain way, to look a certain way, to act a certain way. And I think you see a lot of worship leaders that are chosen now. You have a movement. So churches are exploding. So the churches are being planted at quite a rate, but you have worship leaders not being trained as fast as churches are being planted. So what ends up happening is you have a generation of worship leaders. See, when I started off 20 years ago, it was, how do you be a worship pastor? How do we serve our church? And people used to ask me that 15, 20 years ago, like, oh, I want to do what you do. I want to write songs and be a worship pastor. Matt, in the last 5 to 8 years and to today, the question I get is not how do I write songs for my church and be a worship pastor? More and more, it's how do I become a worship artist? How do I become a worship, a figure? And obviously social media plays into this stuff, and also in the networks that we could pull from, and how clicks mean something, and Spotify won't place your song unless there's algorithms at play. So it's a real scary thing when then you look at what the scriptures talk about as being acceptable. But that's one of the idols I see. And, I don't want to be like an old curmudgeon, like, hey kids, watch out. But at the same time, it's like, I love I love this. I love what Jesus is doing around the world with worship. I love what he's doing with the church. And I do want to voice some of these things so that we could be careful. But, I think about, and this is not new. This is stuff that happened in the scriptures. People put up these idols long before the year 2020. I think one of the great analogies that we could draw from scripture of what we're doing today is, the nation of Israel just was dying to have a king. Like they were built, people are built to want to have a personality lead them. They're built to want to have, and they were dying for a king. So they wanted to elect Saul. And if you look at the way the scriptures talk about Saul, he was tall. He looked a certain way. And then when the prophets pushed back and say, why do you need a king? Why do you want a king? Their answer was, because everyone else has one. And you see churches being planted at this alarming rate. Worship leaders may be a little behind in their training, but it doesn't matter. Just get the worship leader that sounds right. You mentioned it earlier, that looks right, that kind of has that Saul thing. Well, why do you want that? When you want a more seasoned, shepherding, pastoral, we have to keep up. Everyone's got a hot worship leader. This Spotify and iTunes are just full of stuff that's being released constantly. And if you look at who's releasing it, it's by some really cool people. Yeah. And legit, I know a lot of these people. They are so cool. And honestly, bro, like, there's an underbelly to every world, but I know so many of the worship leaders and guys who are writing songs. They are really cool guys, and they may look the part, but they don't want to be there because they look the part. But we have a generation of even pastors who are hiring for the look, for the sound, and there's a million songs being written, so you don't have to create anything. You just have to basically sing this good song well, and that is becoming powerful worship that's supposed to shepherd our people. To me, that's an idol, and it's something that we need to name, and we need to slow it down, and we need worship leaders to be more thoughtful. We need worship leaders to be mindful of the scriptures, and how to shepherd people through worship. Like you said earlier, they could lead a set, and they really can. 20 minutes, I need 20-minute set, and that language even they could lead a set. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I started going, we never called it a set. That's funny language that is come into the church, and it's like worldly language. It's like, hey, how was the set? How was the set? Interesting, But I've got a 13-year-old son who's playing drum. He's a great drummer. He's playing in our youth band, and we've had awesome conversations because he'll ask me that after church. Hey, Dad, how was the set? I'm like, And I know what he means. He's not meaning any harm but it's those little things that could kind of be like, what? It's like the fox in the vineyard, right? It's one fox, but it could kind of spoil things. So the antidote, and I know I'm trying to just sum up that talk, but the antidote is to step into true. So the Bible calls it discipleship. Discipling others, being people worth imitating. And what we have here with this kind of worship rock star culture, what we have to be careful of. And again, I don't want to say this stuff and you start picturing people, because that is judgment, and that is like, we don't know people. And you might look at me, Matt, or you, and it's like, oh, these guys are young guys and they think they're rock stars. This is a slippery slope. We're not here to judge, but I think what ends up happening if we don't tap into building family, like God builds a family, if we don't tap into discipleship, what ends up happening is that what God did in us ends with us. So what God has done in us dies with us if we don't pass it on. And then when you pass it on to people, you realize who you really are, because you don't pass on what you want. You don't pass on your intentions. It's like, you don't pass on, well, I didn't mean to draw all this attention to myself and build my own personal brand and build my own kingdom. You don't pass that on, your intention. You do pass on who you are, not what you're trying to be. And so when you realize that, and when you really take people along the journey with you, it kind of starts to change things. And so that's what the challenge I was bringing was, it's time to disciple people. It's time to build a family. And one of the things, I don't know if I talked about it at this talk, but when God talks about discipleship in the book of Acts, it's all throughout the book of Acts. He's talking about discipleship. And then after the book of Acts, that term discipleship completely goes away and it becomes family language. And so the crux of this, like the big crux of this, is Paul in 1 Corinthians 4 talks about, you have 10,000 teachers. You have 10,000, which really just means like a bajillion. You just have an endless supply of, here's the way I look at this. You have an endless supply of songs. You have an endless supply of song leaders. You have an endless supply of performers and impressive professionals. But what you lack, he says, is fathers and mothers. So he's basically saying, you have all these things, a bajillion good things, but they're not doing the job. It's not working completely. You need fathers and mothers. And when you get fathers and mothers, and when you start to step into what that looks like, it just kind of undoes some of the idols in the land, I think, So, yeah.
You know what's sad?
Yeah.
You know what's sad, John, is something that's so good about needing fathers in worship. Mm-hmm. And what's sad is it seems to me like there is a shelf life for worship leaders. Mm-hmm. So worship leaders, worship pastors are at a church for like 30 years. You hit your like late 40s, 50s, and you're let go because they're bringing on the new young, like 18-year-old whose dresses cool and looks cool and sounds cool.
No longer relevant. Yeah.
But they're not a father. And the fathers are getting kind of like kicked out in a way.
Yeah. And I think that when you have fathers and sons, or mothers and sons and daughters, you have succession. You definitely have succession. Like, I've heard someone say, like, we all say it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And then this guy said it's not a marathon either. Actually, it's a relay race. And if you get to the end of your marathon and you're done, that's it. It's actually a loss. It's actually a failure unless you have someone to hand it off to. Because then it's all about you. It's all about your race. And that's the issue that we have in culture, is that it's all about my race. So it's like, success. We all want success, and we all want godly success. But success, even godly success, without succession, without someone to take it, is actually failure. And you're right. It's these guys are moved out. Maybe they hit their 40s, 50s, whatever. They're moved out. But I think one of the reasons they're moved out, it is an issue with culture, but it's also an issue. They didn't have someone imitating them. They didn't have someone coming up that they could hand it to. Because I look forward to, I'm 42 years old and I love leading worship, but I look forward to getting to an age where I have some guys, some gals that are coming up. I mean, this kid Victor, who I love and just help disciple and work with him. I was just in the studio with him yesterday, working on his vocals and like, watch out for these habits and stuff like that. I wish I had that. It's like one day I can't wait for Victor to be the one who's leading more than I'm leading, but it doesn't disqualify me at all. I have this wonderful role of shepherding and fathering that could go till I'm 80,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that for me, I for sure had somebody who was older who actually saw something in me and was like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to play guitar. I'm going to teach you how to,
so good.
Put a worship time together, and how to rehearse a band. And, we all need someone to actually believe in us and pour into us. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if that person wouldn't have done that. His name was Micah.
Right.
And
that's awesome.
I don't even know if he's leading worship anymore, but I wouldn't be doing what I've been doing if he didn't do that. So it's huge. What do you think?
That's awesome.
So worshiping an idol, what do you think some of the warning signs for a worship leader or a church worship ministry that worship has become an idol?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think when you have a lot of stage people who aren't equipped to shepherd, equipped to pastor, moments. So you have a lot of performers. Do you have pastors? And it's funny that even worship leader is not even in the script. The term is not even a scriptural thing. There's no worship leaders. There are different, kind of the fivefold ministry, and we have a worship school here, and we talk about that. It's like, what's the Lord kind of gifted you in? Prophet, teacher, apostolic, shepherd, evangelist. And so I think I'd watch out for great performers, but little pastoring. I'd watch out for competitive cultures, backbiting. Think about. I talked about this at that event. It was worship that brought about the first murder that we could read about in the scriptures. Do you have a young team that's kind of murdering each other? Not literally, but kind of verbally, with Cain and Abel. That's what happened. And God seemed to accept this type of worship, but didn't accept Cain's worship. Cain couldn't handle that. He ended up killing his brother. Are we doing that? Then you move into Jacob and Esau. This is a big one with Jacob putting on Esau's clothing to get a blessing. I mean, how much do you see that in today's worship industry of trying to look a certain way to get the blessing of God? And it's I think when you're noticing that like people aren't completely being who they are, those are some warning signs. When you notice that when someone's in a room full of 12 people leading worship for them like it's 12,000, that's awkward. Yeah. When someone's in front of 12,000 acting like there's 12 people, that's awkward. There's a lack of awareness that's happening. There's a lack of kind of understanding of how to lead people that's happening. There's a putting on of clothes that are not yours that is happening. I think when you could look at people that don't have people imitating them, like Paul talks about, imitate me, follow me as I follow Christ. I think if you have big leaders, if like, okay, great, you're an awesome leader, you're anointed, you're strong. Who's coming up under you that you're cheering for, that you're helping? If there's nobody, I'd be mindful of that. I think there's a lot of churches a lot of pastors who don't make disciples, so they end up handing the churches off one day they don't have anyone to hand it off to, so they end up handing it off to their sons, or their daughters, and that's good. You got to disciple your kids, and there's probably a lot of Jesus in that, but that's also happening because you're not discipling. So even pastors, like who's kind of imitating you, who's coming up alongside of you, stuff like that. Yeah, those are kind of warning signs of. I think too, like if you're echoing everyone else, like what do you want to say over your own city? What do you want to say over your own church? I think all songwriters should attempt to write some songs, and all worship leaders should attempt to write some songs. And, I think it would be a warning sign too if you're just awesome at imitating.
Yeah.
But you should create.
The struggle with comparison is huge as well, of comparing your church to another church on social media, or your worship leading to another worship leader, or trying to be, maybe it's imitating, trying to be Joel Houston or trying to be Jon Egan, what would you say to a worship leader who's really struggling with comparison, who feels like they're not measuring up?
Right. I would just say the reason that you're feeling that is because you're not convinced that who you are is enough. And I would say there is growth that needs to happen with you. There is kind of a sharpening of your skills that needs to happen, but you're losing sight of you becoming somebody else is not the issue. It's just growing is the issue. And there's an amazing amount of peace that comes with being plugged into a family, being plugged into a church, and people who know you. Because believe me, the rock stars of our generation that are plugged into a church, they're not rock stars everywhere. They're not rock stars at their church. They're pastors. They're men and women of God that are serving. And so I would tell these people, like, there's something in you that feels that they're not enough, and there is growth that needs to happen. But let's talk through that. Let's figure out what it is that's in you that's not feeling enough, because God isn't just not calling you to imitate. He's not calling you to echo. He's calling you to originate. He's calling you to be a voice. But then I would encourage that person too to disciple. I would encourage that person to become what Jesus talks about, to eventually become, even a young person, to become kind of a father, become kind of a mother. And then when you have people that you're looking to, that are looking to you to imitate you, and you realize I can only pass on what I am, that helps expose the stuff that's really inside of you. And I think with discipleship too, one of the great things is that it's not about you succeeding. It's actually about them succeeding. Is it enough for you to see the person you're pouring into have all the things that you dream? And, there's this kind of discipleship square we talk about in our worship school, which is basically like, I do, you watch. And then it's, I do, you help. And then it's, you do, I help. And then the ultimate win is, you do, I watch. You do, I cheer. I cheer you on. So when you say like, that's the ascent, that's where you're headed. You're not headed to more success for yourself. You're actually headed to you helping others, and then you cheering on others. It kind of changes the narrative. It shapes the whole thing differently. I'm not going to be this person. I'm not going to be that person. It's like, well, you're actually meant to just pass on who you are.
Yeah.
And it's not even about your own success. It's about the success of others.
That's really good. It seems like it would be challenging for a worship leader to swim upstream in the way that we've set up our churches, the worship industry. If someone is a worship artist or a worship leader, they write songs, they're wanting to release music, or maybe they're wanting to release music through their church. It almost seems like the system that we've created helps propel this whole idolization of worship and idolization of worship celebrity, worship artists. And it would be really challenging to swim upstream from that, to go a different way, because almost going a different way means that maybe your songs aren't ever going to get heard, or your worship album that your church releases is never going to get heard, or you're not going to get enough streams on Spotify. And it just seems like a very challenging task. And it's almost like worship leaders are set up for failure in that we've kind of created a system that does idolize worship. And how do we change that? How do we, because I do know that a lot of worship pastors, there's good intentions. It's not idolization. It really is a love to serve, a love to just worship, to lead people to the Lord and through song. But they're given 19 and a half minutes to lead a worship set. And then you need to stick on the tracks, and you need to, I don't know, produce a single for your church or whatever. I just don't know. It seems like a very challenging task to do otherwise.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's what makes the opportunity so beautiful. I think we have to redefine what we're doing. I think of like you've heard the priesthood of all believers, this term that we've talked about before, is so the culture we live in, the uphill climb, the upstream thing that you're finding is that we've put on this 4-foot platform on a stage. We hire professional priests to come and do the work for us. You do the heavy lifting. And then we advertise it. Look who is leading worship this Sunday, Jon Egan.
Yeah.
And for those who like the aroma that comes off my life in worship leading, they could decide, I'll go to that. It's happening everywhere and it's okay to enjoy the aroma that comes off someone's life as they lead. But the problem comes, here's where the problem comes. You could be attracted to a place because you like what's happening on that stage, because you like the aroma that comes off their life. But when God has called us all to the priesthood, there's no professional priests and layman priests. This is all of ours to carry. And we've kind of established this culture, like, we'll take care of everything for you, even the sacrifice of worship. We'll take care of everything, even the poor, like, when Mary pours out her year's worth of perfume on Jesus, it releases an aroma in the room, and people were there judging it, like, oh, that was good, or that was bad, that was a waste, that was great. It's so similar to how we do worship now. It's like, ooh, I like this worship guy, or I like this worship leader, this worship gal, the way she sings, or I don't like it. And you could decide to not go to that church because of that. What the sad part that we need to help redefine is that your response to the aroma of that person's extravagance is not your own extravagance. It's their extravagance. Yeah. And we have let people think that they have broken something open costly because we did it.
Yeah.
And that is the uphill climb for worship leaders, is to actually lovingly, I heard Brian Zahn said this once, is we have to lovingly disappoint this over-entertained consumer culture. We have to disappoint them gently. We have to lovingly let them down and say, I am going to give my all up here on this stage. I'm on a 4-foot platform. We're not going to destroy the platform. I'm here so I could help lead you, but it's you who's supposed to break something open that's costly. It's you that is meant to carry the presence of God on their back just as much as I am. It's you. And that will bring disappointment to, I thought you were the paid professional. I thought you were the trained guy that did it for me. It's like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Sorry, that took me a bit to get there.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. That's something I've actually been thinking about the past week or so, in that I wonder if we've kind of taken it a little bit too seriously, in that if we are looking for the best vocalist and the best electric guitar player, the best bass player, we actually end up excluding a lot of people. Like, imagine someone walking up to your church stage and be like, hey, I really just want to serve, and like I play bass, but you audition them and maybe they're just not like an A player, they're a B player. And so you just exclude them and you're like, well, you're not good enough to play in our team. Yeah. And it's the most like uncommunity, like it's the most anti-community thing you could do, because you're just looking for like this high, professional player, but you end up excluding people. Yeah. And so we end up making it about the music instead of the people. So I love what you're saying there about almost we have to like lovingly disappoint.
We do. Yeah, we do. Yeah. And I think there's ways to keep the excellence high. There's ways to keep the bar high, but like we have all kinds of ways to get involved. I mean, we have I think choirs, like, choirs is just back. They're back.
I love choirs.
That. And I think that's a way to people who are just burning to be involved with worship, because you really do. You can help lovingly disappoint someone saying, okay, you want to rock out on a solo. Yeah. We're inviting you to a family.
Yeah. Man, when I led worship for a junior high ministry, I would have kids all the time come up and say they want to sing on the worship team. And I instead assembled a choir of like 30 middle schoolers, and they would be up on stage once a month, like singing and leading the church. And
that's awesome.
Your friends loved it. You know, I mean, it was awesome because it was just like this huge, massive group of middle schoolers, and they all get to serve.
Oh, I love that, bro.
We've gone a little bit over time, but I have one question that came up live. So we had a question from a viewer, Peter, and he's just wondering if there are any resources, maybe a book or training, maybe a podcast, conferences that you would recommend for a worship leader who want to cultivate this idea of, a fatherly, pastoral, priestly role.
Yeah. So I would look up, my friend Aaron Keyes started a worship school called 10,000 Fathers and Mothers. And based on kind of this this idol, this issue. I've admired it from afar and have been talking about this idea even before I met him. And now they just moved to Colorado Springs. So it's actually the worship school that we partner with here. So I help teach at that school. And so I would look up that school and all the many resources that comes with that school. I would go to that school. I actually went through it myself. It's an 18-month program. But there's books like, so Mike Breen has a book called Making a Discipleship Culture, which talks a lot about this. I would read that. Henry Nouwen has a book called In the Name of Jesus, which is talking about what really is God raising up as leaders right now, and restoring kind of the leader who loves Jesus. I mean, don't you love that? What is God doing with leaders? Is he strategizing a new model? Is he strategizing a new way of talking? No, he is raising up leaders that just truly love Jesus, who truly know him, even to know him and to love him. So I would look up that book. Henry, he had now and stuff. He also has a book called Reaching Out, which talks about hospitality and how we host people well, and in fathering and mothering. Those are a few really good resources.
That's awesome.
Great question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I'm going to check out those. Thanks, Peter, for the question. John, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us and share your heart. I love your pastoral heart.
Thanks, man.
I've only seen you lead worship one time, and it was actually at that conference. And man, I just remember it being just electric, dude. You pulled back. You did. Did you feel the mountains tremble?
Yeah.
And it was super old school.
But the old Delirious days, man. Yeah. Those guys shaped so much of who I am.
Yeah. That's a special album too, though. What was it called? Cutting Edge.
Oh yeah. All that stuff. Yeah.
But I just love your heart, man, for worship pastors, and I'd love to make it back out to New Life in Colorado Springs someday. But
bro, you got too many friends out here now not to come and see us.
I know. You've got Eddie and Andy. Tell them all I said hello, all right?
I will, for sure.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
All right, John, see you soon.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, see ya. All right. Awesome interview with Jon Egan there from New Life Worship, New Life Church in Colorado Springs. If you haven't heard John's music, go check him out on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get music. Just search Jon Egan, you'll find it. I actually should have asked him too, if they're doing any new music at our New Life, but I'm sure they are. So maybe just search that as well. But really great stuff there. So I'd encourage you to also check out those books that he recommended. Maybe we can put those down in the description of this video for you to go check those out. Because I think for me as a worship leader, the ways that I've grown the most have been from books. And I know that's not for everybody, but those are some really, really great resources that he threw out there. So make sure you check those out. And anyways, thanks for joining us for Loop Live. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, make sure you hit the subscribe or like button wherever it is. And we'll see you next time on Loop Live. Thanks for joining us. Hey, what's up, guys? This is Matt McCoy. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Hey, it means so much to us when you let us know what you thought. Write down in the comments what you learned from this episode, anything else that you found encouraging from this episode. Glad you guys are listening to the podcast. Hope to provide to you a lot of helpful content as you lead worship. See you soon.